coming to you live from the heart of the free state of New Hampshire. This is The Independents with Carla Garrick. And now, here's your host, Carla Garrick.
Hi guys, and welcome back to The Independents. It's so great to see you. For people who follow along, my apologies for not being here last week. We had, about a foot of snow, and I decided to dig out my entire chicken coop with a shovel because I couldn't find my snow thing. And I'm not the spring chicken I like to think I am anymore. And so my back got a little, and I was like, I'm going to stay at home because there's a lot of snow. And well, there you have it. I hope your first winter storm went a little more smoothly. But here we are, we're back. It is the second week of December. So as we head into the holiday season, I thought we could do a little bit of a deep dive into property taxes here in New Hampshire today. As most of you know, back home, I am a lawyer by training, but now in my third, possibly fourth career, I'm a real estate agent, and I have the fortune of talking to people from out of state who are deciding whether New Hampshire would be a great home for them. And one of the conversations that always comes up, of course, is how do property taxes work in New Hampshire? And actually also the reason it comes up is because we don't have many broad-based taxes here. We, of course, in New Hampshire don't have a personal income tax. Thanks to the work of Free Staters and Liberty-aligned folks here in New Hampshire, we no longer have an interest in dividends tax, and we don't have a sales tax. So then the question becomes, how do we fund government? And that question is partly answered by property rights, and then things like actually property transfer taxes, some of the sin taxes, so from the alcohol stores, the liquor stores here in New Hampshire, of course, are state-owned, and my proposition is always that I think we should make the cannabis part of that structure and undersell all the surrounding states by undercutting their taxes on cannabis and just sort of leading with that New Hampshire advantage in that market as well. But some of the other taxes, you might see our room and board, that is, around 9% or maybe 8.5%. So the chunk of how we fund the state actually comes from property taxes. So there was this incredibly great 3-part series that came out on the Granite Eagle, and it has to do with a general overview of property taxes in New Hampshire, where the schools fit into the whole story, and why school spending drives property taxes, and then last but not least, who is actually raising property taxes in New Hampshire. And so I thought it'd be useful today to just really read through these articles. And so consider this sort of fair use from an educational standpoint, but you can find this information at the Granite Eagle. It was published November 24th, the first one. So here we go with part 1 of how property taxes work in New Hampshire. So property taxes in New Hampshire are often widely debated, but mostly misunderstood. With no broad-based income or sales tax, the state leans heavily on local property taxes to fund schools, town services, and county obligations. That makes it essential for taxpayers to understand how assessments work, because I'm sure, like you You probably got your property tax bill. I got mine for here in West Manchester. It's around $6,500 if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. Our house is assessed at $340 if I remember correctly, which might be a smidge low, but don't tell anyone. So, when you get those assessments in and when you get your property taxes, this is supposed to help you understand what's going on. So help you understand how assessments work and why a higher assessment does not automatically mean a higher tax bill. For each town, there are 4 main parts to a tax bill. In order from largest to smallest, it is local school spending, then local town spending, then state school aid, and then county spending. These comprise the total tax revenue needed to be raised by a town to meet its obligations. So then in this article, they go on to create basically a fake example of a little town called Granite Borough. And in Granite Borough, the town needs to raise $100,000 to fund its municipal operations, schools, and county obligations for the year. And then there's a little side note where it says, well, that's how you know this example is fictional, because of course they need to raise much more. And most of us who have watched this program over the years know that the biggest chunk of our property taxes go to the schools. Okay. So in this hypothetical Granite Borough, because the 10 properties start at equal value, each one is responsible for 10% of the Granite Borough's total levy. That means every property owner, homeowners, and businesses alike pays $10,000 in property taxes. So that's just the $100,000 divided by the $10,000. This simple setup allows us to examine how assessments shift the distribution of taxes without affecting the total amounts raised. So you've got a pie chart and each of them is 10% of the round pie, right? Now you have the $100,000 tax burden and you have to divvy it up. So a property assessment is an estimate of the property's fair market value. New Hampshire requires municipalities to maintain reasonably accurate and proportional assessments, which is why the towns periodically conduct reevaluations. A key point is assessments do not decide how much money a town raises. They decide how the burden is divided amongst the taxpayers. Towns set their spending during town meeting, school district meeting, and SB 2 ballot votes. That spending determines the total levy. Assessments only determine how that levy is shared. If all assessments doubled tomorrow, but spending stayed the same, so that would be some kind of miracle too, Granite Borough would still need only $100,000. The tax rate would simply be cut in half, so the tax bills would remain unchanged. Now, every 5 years, we've all experienced this, New Hampshire's towns must conduct the reevaluation. So if our fictional town of Granite Borough conducts a reevaluation as mandated by state law, you'll see the following. As we know, real estate prices don't move uniformly, and homes appreciate at different rates. So let's say in our example with our pie chart, we have the 10 properties, some are businesses, some are homes. Let's say 4 of the homes went up in value by 10%. 4 of the homes went up in value by 40%. And then both businesses remained unchanged. So what would happen? So in this example, every residential property did go up, but they didn't go up equally, right? So because the towns, school districts, and counties have miraculously, in this example, not increased spending, they still only need the 100,000 we talked about at the start, right? So what happens in this scenario is each property's share of the tax base changes. So it seems logical when you think about it that if your assessment goes up, your tax bill must go up. But that's not necessarily what would happen. It's the relative change in value that determines your tax bill. The home that increased by the 10% that we just talked about now represents a smaller share of the town's total value compared to the homes that increased by 40%. So even though its assessment only went up 10%, it rose less than the town's overall growth. So the homes that rose by only 10% in the reevaluations actually see their tax bills go down because they now make a smaller percentage of the total assessed value than before. The homes that went up by the 40%, their share of the tax burden actually goes up because they appreciated faster than their neighbors. So this is the purpose of the reevaluation, to realign each property tax's responsibility to reflect the market. So now in that example we said where we had the 4 homes at 10%, 4 homes at 40%, and then the businesses which stayed the same. In our example with the $100,000 that we have to divvy up, those first ones that went up 10% will pay about $9,167, but the ones that went up 40% will now end up paying $11,667, and the businesses which remained the same would pay $8,333, so $8,333. Now, if we consider, let's say one of the businesses closes, right? Then after after the reevaluation, one of the Granite Borough's 2 businesses close, and it's removed from the tax roll entirely. Well, what happens then? Well, we know we still have to raise this miraculously low $100,000 to fund operations, schools, and the county costs. But instead of there being 10 taxpayers now, because we've lost one, we only have 9. So out of those 9, now you have to take your pool of the 100,000 and you have to divvy it up amongst those 9 properties. So each one of those people's tax burden would probably go up around, so it would go up and it would rise to roughly 11,111, which is a number I gotta love. That's a lot of ones right there. So this example is supposed to help you guys understand the real world phenomenon that we see here in New Hampshire towns. So when a major commercial business closes, relocates, or successfully applies for a variance or appeals their assessment, you'll see that the residents in that town will immediately see the impact. So fewer taxpayers sharing the same required spending means higher bills for everyone who remains. So what does that tell you? That tells you actually that, we should care about our businesses and we should try and keep them thriving within our communities. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about what's the difference between assessments versus spending. So many property tax debates in New Hampshire conflate assessments with spending, right? But in our Granite Borough example, we can make the distinction clear for you. So here is the distinction. Assessments determine the distribution of the tax burden. So who pays what? Spending determines the size of the tax burden. So in those examples, you have the assessments determine the distribution, right? So that's the 10%, 40%, and stay the same. And then the size of the tax burden is the $100,000. So a homeowner could actually see a large assessment increase, but pay the same amount if the total levy, the $100,000, stays flat. So this is where you start to see that spending matters, right? Because if that $100,000 starts to go up, then all of our tax burdens start to go up. So conversely, a homeowner whose assessment barely changes might actually see a significant increase in their tax burden if the school budget, or less likely, the town budget, increases, right? So again, it matters what those budgets are, guys. So the driver of rising taxes is almost always not the assessments, but the increase in local and school spending. So if your school budget goes up, you're gonna pay more. So it's not actually the reevaluation process. But of course, the schools and the people with their hands in your pockets want you to conflate these things. So why do reevaluations matter? New Hampshire law requires that municipalities keep assessments within 10% of the market value. If valuations drift out of alignment, then we see inequalities grow. So what happens? Then some taxpayers end up paying too much, others pay too little, and properties with similar values actually end up being taxed differently. So the idea is that reevaluations every 5 years or so corrects these imbalances. They do not raise additional revenue for the town. Only budget decisions can do that. So what is the takeaway here? The takeaway, folks, is the following: that local control drives your costs. So because New Hampshire relies on local property taxes more heavily than other states, right? Other states have personal income tax, they have sales tax, they have their hands in your pocket in 100 extra ways that we don't luckily have here in New Hampshire. But because we rely so heavily on our property taxes, your community actually holds a lot of power, right? And we saw that in that Croydon example from a few years ago now, but you can find information about that online if you're interested, where the town of Croydon actually at their annual town meeting cut the budget of the school by 50%. And the thinking there was to really force the issue so that people can start to understand how important local control really is. So annual town meetings, your school district meetings, your deliberative sessions, and ballot votes determine how much a town spends each year, which we'll see now in part 2 directly impacts the tax bill for all residents. So what's the takeaway again? Spending decisions create the obligation, the levy. So spending is where we need to be looking, right? So assessments only determine how the levy, the obligation, is shared. So again, spending determined by school and town budgets. Assessments are there to tell you how to divide this obligation. Okay. So because these concepts are often confused, I wanted to make sure we understand this so that now as we get into part 2, and we probably won't have time for part 3, which I will then do next week or pre-record, depending on where we are on the holiday schedule. But in part 2, and reminder, this is from the Granite Eagle, and part 2 says, what goes into New Hampshire property tax bill and why school spending drives it. All right, so property tax bills in New Hampshire are made up, as I said at the start, of 4 major components. What are they again? Local school, municipal, county, and then there's a statewide education property tax, which we'll call SWEPT, okay? So in a typical community, this breakdown looks like this. Your local school spending Local school spending is now 60% of the budget, guys. And as enrollment drops, the price keeps going up, and we're getting less in terms of real outcomes, like kids can't read and write anymore. So 60% of your tax bill is going so that kids cannot read and write. So we got to fix this, right? So 60% to school spending. Town spending is only 25%. So when people go, who will build the roads? It's like, well, you could keep 60% of your money and we could still pay for the roads if we could fix this school problem. The swept is about 8%. And then county spending is about 7%, right? So, okay, local schools, about 60% of the budget. Town spending, 25% of the budget, and then the other two is about 15. All right, so 85% of property tax bills is directly determined by the elected officials on the local level. So that's actually really cool, right? Because it puts it very much in your and my and our control to try and control our own property taxes. So, the important people, the ones you should actually know who they are, is not Trump and Biden. It's like who's on your school board and who is your town selectman. Because these percentages never rise or fall evenly, understanding how each part behaves is really important for you to grasp the entire picture. So school enrollment has been steadily dropping. I mean, the birth rate is going down. There are various reasons for that. Here in New Hampshire, of course, we have actually introduced a lot of school choice. The school choice means what? It doesn't mean you're trying to destroy children from learning. School choice means giving people more choices so that each individual child can learn according to their needs, right? What we created was this one-size-fits-all sort of model based on your age. It's a Prussian model that was like widgets for factory workers. And now that we are in the AI age, maybe we need to adjust a little. So school enrollment's down, but prices or the expense of schools keep going up. So most school districts continue approving budget increases, which is a dynamic that reinforces or this dynamic is reinforced by New Hampshire's sort of push for local control. I mean, that is something we all kind of like, but it is becoming a problem, and there's this tension that's developing between the State House, the legislators, and the local control, because these guys are out of control. I mean, it's the short version, right? And so the way to think about it is, on a state level, the state should be meddling in this local control when the local control is actually circumventing or taking away constitutional protected, New Hampshire constitutional protected rights or U.S. constitutional protected rights. And so stepping back from the property taxes for a second, that's the 2A argument as well, right, with gun rights. So if a local town in New Hampshire were to ban guns from their municipality, the state would have to intervene because we have more rights here than they've done here. And so the state has to say, no, you can't do that because this is a basic constitutional right. All right, so when we're looking at this whole issue, it is really, really important, or the takeaway for today should be, how can I get involved locally? Because if you got your tax bill and you were like, whoa, what happened here? What do you need to know? That it's not necessarily the assessment, but that it is your budget and how things are being spent. So if you're curious, maybe you start filing some right to knows with your town and you ask them, what the enrollment numbers are in your school. Have they gone up? Have they gone down? If they've gone down, why have why did the budget go up, right? And then have those meetings, show up, go to the town hall meetings, go to the school board meetings, serve on your school board if you can, and let's see if we can wrestle this issue into a thing that actually helps Granite Staters, right? Because if we can crack this nut, if we can figure out and stop spending too much money on things that are not giving us the results we want, then we can actually benefit everyone in the state, from the children to the homeowners to the teachers. Now, I personally don't have a lot of sympathy for the bureaucrats, and those are the people clinging to the olden days and these olden ways that do not serve us as Granite Staters anymore. So we're up against the time here. So I think what I'm going to do is summarize it the following. There are 5 here. Why school spending dominates tax growth. All right. Local school budgets make up most of your tax bill. County increases, even big ones on the county level, barely move the needle. 3, enrollment has declined, but none of the budgets have. 4, state spending on education is at an all-time high. So the state's doing their part. So now we got to look at local control. And 5, local control makes restraint politically difficult. So for decades, lawmakers, especially Democrats, have opposed state-level spending caps, arguing that decisions must remain local. The result of this has been predictable. Local school budgets rise faster than any other part of your property bill. So most school boards are controlled by members who favor increases. Why? Because they're getting paid. All right, so let's leave it there for today. Maybe next week I will come in and let you know who is actually raising property taxes in New Hampshire. But I bet you guys can guess it's the people who benefit from it. Shocker. All right, today was all about property taxes in New Hampshire. You can find everything I was reading about, as well as the pie charts and all of that, at the Granite Eagle. I will post the links to it on my YouTube channel, Carla Garrick TV, and I will see everyone back here again next week. Thanks so much for joining me.